This is H.M. Wynant, and you're listening to TV Confidential. Please enjoy.
How do you do? You gentlemen, of course, know how to push a product. That essentially is your job. My presence here is for much the same purpose, simply to push a product. To acquaint you with an entertainment product which we hope and which we rather expect will make your product pushing that much easier. What you're about to see, gentlemen, is a series called The Twilight Zone. We think it's a rather special kind of series. Essentially, people watch television to get entertained. And the keynote of this series, the thing we're concerned with, the thing we're aiming for, the thing we're working toward is entertainment. This is a series for the storyteller, because it's our thinking that an audience will always sit still and listen and watch a well-told story. And now that I've immodestly gone on record predicting the high quality of this series, let me very briefly show you what we mean by a special kind of series. You know, writers in general are notoriously bad verbal tellers of stories. We do much, much better behind a typewriter. So I hope you'll bear with me while I tell you about a few stories that happen to be the first ones we're shooting in our current production cycle.
Ed Robertson, welcoming you back to TV Confidential, radio talk show about television. Always happy to welcome back our friend Joseph Dougherty. Joseph Dougherty, the Emmy Award-winning writer, producer, and director of such acclaimed series as 30-something, Judging Amy, Once and Again, Saving Grace, and Pretty Little Liars. Joseph Dougherty, also the author of such books as A Screenwriters Companion, Instruction, Opinion, Encouragement, a part memoir, part how-to book about the writing process and the many influences that have led Joe to a successful career. Joe has said on many occasions, including once on this very program, if memory serves, that in many respects, the genesis for his own career in television began when he was 8 years old and discovered the works of Rod Serling for the very first time when he watched The Twilight Zone every Friday night on CBS. Calendar year 2024 marks the 100th anniversary of the birth of Rod Serling, and in one of those full circle moments that life sometimes brings to us, Joe's latest book takes a deep dive into the career of Rod Serling and what the work of Rod Serling has meant to him personally. The book is called Rod Serling at 100. We'll tell you more about it in just a second. Joseph Dougherty, welcome back to our program.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure doing this show.
This is a very personal book for you in many ways.
This is a very personal book. Yes. As you pointed out, this 2024 is would have been Rod's 100th birthday. He was born on Christmas Day, 1924. And when I realized that this was going to be the centenary, I really felt a need to try and sit down and put my own thoughts about his work in some kind of readable form, and to talk about the contribution he's made and maybe talk about I wanted to talk about the shows that people knew and maybe give them a slightly different perspective on them, and also introduce them to other parts of his body of works, which they may not know about and would lead them to more about Rod. And yes, when I was a kid, my parents were either indulgent or neglectful, but I got to watch the first run. And besides the incredible power of the stories and the writing and I realized that Rod can be seen as one of perhaps the major force for making people take science fiction and fantasy serious as an adult form of drama. But he was there. His voice was there, and his physical presence was there in a very good suit. And it was a realization that, you can do this. That writers are real people, and these are handmade objects. And that just got in my hard wiring and stayed. And I'm not the only one. I think we live in a multi-generational world where Rod has shaped a tremendous amount of how television works.
He not only made writing for science fiction acceptable for network television, as you just said, but as you say very clearly in Rod Serling at 100. And folks, that is the leaf blowers blowing outside of my recording space as we have this conversation. So if you'll indulge the noise just a little bit, we will soldier on. But as you say in Rod Serling at 100, Joe, in many ways, he created the form of writing for television, period. He was one of the ones.
He is. He's one of a handful of playwrights at the beginning of the 1950s, the end of the 1940s, the beginning of the 1950s, who were there to shape what dramatic television looked like. Unlike writers such as Paddy Chayefsky, he made a decision in 1959 to go to series, to do series television as opposed to freestanding plays. And he once joked that he was having trouble with censorship on a play written about the United States Senate, and he wasn't allowed to say anything about the real United States Senate. And he said, I could have set this in the future and made it all about robots, and I probably would have had the same play, maybe more effective. And that's one of the things he carried over into Twilight Zone, was basically with these almost parables using science fiction. He could talk about anything he wanted to, and he did. He was a very serious, dedicated writer. This is a man who, 3 days after he graduated high school in 1943, he enlisted and fought in the Second World War, and he was in a drastic theater of war in the Pacific. And he's one of the survivors, one of the veterans of the war, who came back with a worldview they needed to talk about, they needed to write about. He says he burned and he wrote as a therapy initially. And fortunately, it was something that we've been able to share with.
Joseph Dougherty's latest book, Rod Serling at 100, One Writer's Acknowledgement, takes a deep dive into the television career of Rod Serling, while also offering a new perspective on the master storyteller. Rod Serling at 100, One Writer's Acknowledgement, available right now through our friends at Fayetteville Mafia Press, as well as Amazon.com.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
This is Jack Klugman, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Question about In Praise of Pip, the episode of Twilight Zone that you did with Billy Mooney. Do you have any recollections of that wonderful amusement park scene with Billy?
Oh, yeah, I remember that show. I remember every one of the Twilight Zones. He called me. And he said, I wrote a show for you. I said, I'm in Gypsy. I can't go out. He said, I know you get 2 weeks off in January, so come on, I want you to come out. So he saved it for me, and it was a wonderful show. I played the trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, the genius of the Twilight Zone in particular is that while a lot of the stories take place in modern time, or at least modern time in 1959, you get the sense that it's a time, it's not current modern time, in that it enabled him to comment on social issues, things that bothered him or concerned him, without being subversive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the reasons that the Twilight Zone hasn't dated, why it's still enjoyable, is that even the contemporary episodes that were made and set in the 60s, they are timeless in terms of the fact that the human emotions have not changed. We haven't evolved away from enough of our prejudices and fears and concerns and needs that these parables, that these stories, in the case of the half-hour episodes, 25-minute, just really strong storytelling, haven't got something to say to us. It's interesting. I was talking to someone the other day about basically it's like we are here talking about a television series, one television series that went off the air a little more than 60 years ago. And it remains relevant. It has had an impact on more than one generation of creative artists and is going to continue to. And that it was all started by this remarkable man who tragically died at the age of 50 in 1975. I mean, one of the things I say in the book is basically, yes, this is the centenary year, and Serling barely made it halfway, and wasn't sure he had made a lasting impact.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. We're going to jump around as we almost often do when we have conversations such as these, folks. But Rod Serling at 100, Joe's latest book. It's not a straightforward biography. It's not a straightforward filmography. It's sort of a look at various themes that were important to Serling throughout his writing career, as well as themes that spoke to Joe personally as he watched them at the time and as he revisited them over the course of the ensuing 50, 60 plus years. But two things that you have in the book that enhances the reading experience, at least in my case, the enjoyment experience. You've got quotes from two television interviews that Serling gave. One, as it happened, and this works in a bookend sort of respect. One, as it happens, that aired about a week or so before Twilight Zone premiered on CBS television. The other that aired it aired about a month before what was the final season of Night Gallery. And to touch on the point you just made about how near the end of his life, as it turned out, Serling questioned the importance, the legacy of his own work. In that interview, which was with Dick Cavett in 1972, he sounded very much like the professor Donald Pleasance played in Changing of the Guard.
I think it's you've struck on one of the most interesting aspects of the Twilight Zone. That episode about a professor who feels he has failed his students has some of the most self-depreciating dialogue ever written for a character. And you can hear, and it's not just a teacher saying that, it's everybody who does anything. I have changed nothing.
Yeah.
What have I changed? And unfortunately, I hear Rod Serling's doubts in that. And as you pointed out, it's not a biography. My book isn't a biography of Serling. There's some biographical information, but if you wanted a deep dive there are several published biographies. They don't all take the same tack, so I would suggest reading more than one so you can make up your own mind. It's not a detailed production history. I apologize right up front for not talking about actors or directors or any of the creative people who contributed to what the Twilight Zone was. I wanted to just talk about the writing, and people have to understand that that's what I felt I could talk about with a certain kind of authority. And I wanted to go in to some of the episodes that are very well known and very well remembered. In some cases, people remember them who've never seen them. And I wanted to talk about what was going on in them from a writing standpoint, and also some of the themes and how he would revisit themes, turn them on their ear, and just kind of play with them. Serling wrote, I think, 92 of the 160 some odd episodes. of Twilight Zone. And because I know this from experience for having had to write at the speed of television myself, there's very little room for theory. You are in a room, you have a task, you have a story, you have a deadline. You have to, it's a phrase I think I used was, you're practicing Zen on an unfinished roller coaster. You gotta do it. So over those 160 episodes, you can watch Rod Serling firing on all cylinders, just there, being the master of the universe and having control of everything. And sometimes you can see one or two episodes that just had to go into production Tuesday. And what you see in the quote lesser close quote episodes is his skill and his craft. When he was inspired and on fire, his stuff is magnificent. When he's got a job to do, you can watch his craft and you can just watch him work with what he's got. And it's just really impressive for a writer to watch that. And because sometimes these episodes were written very quickly and sometimes they're considered a little thin, you get to see more of the craft. You get to see more of how exactly the furniture is being put together. And for a writer, that's fascinating.
I don't remember which person said this, but you quote him in the book. It may have been Buck Houghton, who said, every story, whether for television, whether for novels, whether for plays, literally, is a 3-act drama. Conflict, complication, resolution. The 30-minute Twilight Zones in particular, by necessity, had to be tightly written, as you just pointed out. And I forget who it was who said it, but he said a typical Twilight Zone is all third act.
That's George Clayton Johnson said it. One of the writers, one of the handful of writers who were able to walk into the theater that Rod Serling created and mount their version of the Twilight Zones. And it's George Clayton Johnson, Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont, and later Earl Hamner.
Yeah.
These are men who who saw the opportunity in writing for the Twilight Zone, and their work for the Twilight Zone is some of the best work they ever did. And they embellished it. They embellished his world. But no, George Clayton Johnson, it's all third act. I have to get everything here done. And maybe you can think about that third act as being 2 acts because it's split in the middle at about 12 minutes. But that's a very short length of time to tell a story.
And the fact that as he wrote, roughly 70% of these by himself.
Yeah.
And at a time when contractually he had to produce. Television seasons were a lot longer when the Twilight Zone originally premiered in '59. And I believe the first season was somewhere between 35 and 40 episodes, which is
it's definitely in the 30s. I don't know if it got all the way up to the 40s, but 32, 33 is like the magic number in the 50s.
Yeah. And which is 3 times the typical length of a network season, at least 3 times the typical length of a network drama today, or a digital, a Netflix or digital or cable drama. And so the fact that he wrote so many of these things by himself under that sort of production schedule, and they're still being enjoyed for the first time, and even the ones that, as you say, were on the air because you have to shoot something by Tuesday, they're still a notch above most of television fare then and most of television fare today.
Yeah, I mean, of course I'm prejudiced, but as far as I'm concerned, there is not, we could quibble, and I know some people have quibbled with me about what the episodes are that shouldn't count, but there's usually something.
Yeah.
There's a scene, there's a gesture, there's a speech, there's a performance, there's a line of dialogue There's an image that sticks with you. There's it stood out in its initial run. I don't know if people noticed it when it was happening, or if they just knew they were coming away with a strange kind of feeling. That's it. I want more of this. I want to know more. I like this world. I want to stay here, and I want to see these lessons. I want to see what they do next week. And the actors just loved being on the show because they were, they knew Serling from his Playhouse 90 work, and he knew them from Playhouse 90 and Craft Theater. And there's a video of Jack Klugman talking about how you wanted a Serling script, and he's literally holding his hands in front of him during the interview, like he's got this great piece of meat that he's going to chew on for an hour. Actors loved it and did, again, some of their best work. Jack Klugman made 4 episodes there.
And he did The Velvet Alley, which is a play. I'll admit I was not as familiar with that until I read Rod Serling at 100 by Joseph Dougherty. But that may have been Klugman's first. I was going to say first introduction, which is redundant, but I think that was the first time he performed the words as Serling, and then he subsequently did the 4 Twilight Zones that all of us remember.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the first time. I just know it was that actually it's like Velvet Alley was done live in January of 1959, and then Twilight Zone premiered in October of that month. And it's if you ever get to see it, it's wonderful. It's a young Jack Klugman. They have to age him up so they have to put a little gray in his hair. But yeah, Jack Klugman is in a Playhouse 90. Richard Keeley is in a Craft.
Art Carney. He was in The Velvet Alley, and then he did the famous Christmas episode of Twilight Zone. And I'm trying to, for some reason, I think he did one other, but I might be mixing things up in the moment. Joseph Dougherty's latest book, Rod Serling at 100, One Writer's Acknowledgement, takes a deep dive into the television career of Rod Serling, while also offering a new perspective on the master storyteller. Rod Serling at 100, One Writer's Acknowledgement, available right now through our friends at Fayetteville Mafia Press, as well as Amazon.com.
We'll take a quick time out, then we'll talk some more with Joseph Dougherty about the works of Rod Serling. We come back here on TV Confidential. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please consider subscribing to the TV Confidential podcast, or better yet, give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or wherever you listen to our podcast.
Now you can get generic Viagra shipped to your door for about $2 a pill. Get the same impact for less. Call Steelman Pills now and get the same blue pill for about $2 a pill. Call now for the 50-pill special and save even more. Plus, get a free bonus.
800-932-2613. 800-932-2613. That's 800-932-2613.